Life in Benidorm podcasts.
Ready to swap our mainland perspective for an island adventure today?
Always up for an adventure, especially when it involves a bit of history.
Well, get ready, because today's deep dive takes us to Benidorm Island, or as the locals call it, Lilla.
Lilla, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Sounds intriguing already.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it should, because this island is anything but your typical deserted blip on the map.
Oh, do tell.
You sent over this fascinating piece from Histo Benidorm, a blog that really digs into local history. And let me tell you, this island has a past. Like, seriously, a past that could rival some countries.
Now you've got me hooked. Pirates, shipwrecks, hidden treasures, what are we talking about here?
All of that and more. We're
Yeah.
talking pirates, Romans, ancient legends.
Okay, you've convinced me. Where do we even begin with all that?
How about we start by, setting the scene, getting a feel for the island itself.
Sounds good to me. So, paint me a picture. What are we dealing with size-wise?
Okay, so imagine this. You're cruising along the coast of Blanca, soaking up the sun, and just off the coast of bustling Benidorm, you see this. Well, to be honest, a somewhat unassuming island.
Unassuming, you say?
Yeah, I mean, at first glance, you might not think much of it, but that's where things get interesting. See, what this blog reveals is that beneath that sun-soaked surface lies a history richer than you could imagine.
I'm all ears. So about the size.
Right. Well, that's where things get a little, shall we say, mysterious.
Mysterious, as in we don't actually know how big this island is.
Well, the blog mentions it being roughly 1,000 feet long, kind of triangular in shape. But then when you look at different sources, the actual recorded size varies a lot.
Interesting. Makes you wonder why there's such a discrepancy. Were they using different measuring tapes back in the day?
Maybe. Or maybe. This is just a thought. Maybe the perceived importance of the island at the time influenced how it was documented.
You're saying a bigger island on paper might have equaled a bigger deal in reality.
Exactly. Like, if you want your island to be taken seriously, you might just fudge the measurements a little.
I suppose anything's possible. Okay, so regardless of its exact dimensions, what else do we know about this island?
Well, the blog talks about these strikingly contrasting landscapes. On the southeastern side, known as Gvala de Lia, meaning the thick part, you've got these steep, almost imposing cliffs.
Okay, I'm picturing those dramatic cliffs rising straight out of the water. Not exactly the first image that comes to mind when you think island paradise.
Right. And then on the northwestern side, things change completely. The terrain gently slopes down to the sea, creating a much more accessible area. It's no surprise that this is where you'll find the island's harbor.
Makes sense. Gotta have some way for people to actually get onto the island. But before we dive into all the human history, you mentioned legends earlier. What's this about a giant carving out the island?
Ah, yes, the legend of Roldan. I have to admit, it's a good one.
Let's hear it.
Well, legend has it that this giant, Roldan, created Benidorm Island with a single swipe of his sword. Supposedly, he was heartbroken over a lost love, and the island was like a symbol of his grief.
Wow, that's quite the dramatic origin story. So what's the truth behind the legend?
Sadly, as with most good legends, it seems that this one is just that, a legend.
No sword-wielding giants. What a shame. So how did this little island actually come to be?
Well, geologically speaking, Benidorm Island's formation is a result of millions of years of erosion, not lovesick giants, sadly.
Erosion, huh? That's quite a contrast to the giant sword theory.
It really is. The blog explains that Benidorm Island is actually a remnant of a much, much larger mountain range, the Serra Gelada.
So over time, the wind, the rain, the sea, they just chipped away at this mountain range until only this little piece was left.
Exactly. It's amazing to think that what we see today is just a tiny, hardened survivor of this ancient landscape.
It makes you wonder, if the island is a product of Serra Gelada eroding, what else might we owe to that same process?
You're thinking what I'm thinking, those famous Benidorm beaches.
Bingo. The blog talks about how the Serra Gelada was partly composed of, get this, ancient sand dunes? So as the mountains eroded, these dunes would broken down too. And where does all that sand go?
Carried southward by the currents, eventually forming those beautiful beaches we see today. It's mind-blowing.
Talk about millions of years in the making, right? It really puts things into perspective.
It does, but I have a feeling this is just the beginning of Benidorm Island's story. Okay, so we've got this island, sculpted over eons by the forces of nature, but as we know, nature wasn't the only sculptor at work here.
Definitely not. Where do humans enter the picture in all of this?
Right. What can you tell us about the first humans who interacted with Benidorm Island? Was it love at first sight, or
Well, it seems Benidorm Island's prime location, right in the heart of those fishing grounds, was recognized pretty early on. The blog mentions evidence pointing to prehistoric fishermen going as far back as the Neolithic period.
Wow, we're talking really far back. So even then, it was a prime spot to cast a line. But did they ever, stick around, or was it always a quick stop for them?
That's a good question, isn't it? Did those early fishermen ever think about setting up camp there?
Right. It's a pretty idyllic spot when you think about it.
It's hard to say for sure, but we do know that fast-forwarding a few thousand years, the island saw a much more substantial human presence during the Roman Empire.
Okay, so we're talking togas and chariots now. I'm ready for a good Roman history lesson.
Get ready, because the blog describes archaeological digs, uncovering pottery shards, building foundations, even a hearth.
A hearth. That's a pretty clear sign that people weren't just passing through, right?
Exactly. This suggests a more established Roman settlement on the island, a place where people actually lived and worked.
It really makes you wonder what their daily life must have been like. Any theories on what they were up to out there, besides tending the hearth?
It seems likely that the Romans saw Benidorm Island as this strategic point along their trade routes.
So not just a home, but a potential hub of commerce as well. Makes sense, given its location.
Right, and the blog mentions these shipwrecks, Roman shipwrecks, found nearby that seem to back this up.
Shipwrecks. Now, those are always a good source of clues. What kind of stuff do they find?
The shipwrecks were laden with amphorae, those large ceramic jars they used to transport goods in ancient times?
Ah, yes, the ancient Tupperware.
Exactly. And the fact that they found these amphorae suggests that Benidorm Island might have played a role in facilitating Roman trade throughout the Mediterranean. It's like a key rest stop on their maritime Silk Road.
It's fascinating how even a small island like this could hold such strategic importance. But after the Roman Empire fell, I imagine things probably took a bit of a turn, right?
Not thinking what I'm thinking. Pirates.
Had to be. You can't talk about a strategically located island without mentioning pirates.
You're on the right track. The blog dives into some 16th century reports that actually detail the island's use as a haven for pirates. In fact, there's even an account of a letter written by Vespasiano Gonzaga, who was essentially the viceroy of Valencia at the time.
Wait, a viceroy writing a letter about pirates? This sounds juicy. Who was the letter addressed to?
The letter was to none other than the King of Spain himself, King Philip II.
Wow, talk about going straight to the top. What did the letter say? Was the king a big fan of pirates, or?
Not so much. Gonzaga was pretty adamant that Benidorm Island's location made it the ideal pirate hideout. Ships couldn't be spotted from the mainland, which gave him that element of surprise.
Like the pirate version of stealth mode.
Exactly. And then you've got the surrounding waters providing ample opportunities for, shall we say, relieving unsuspecting merchant vessels of their cargo.
So basically pirate paradise. What did Gonzaga want the king to do about it?
He actually urged the king to fortify the island. He even went so far as to suggest the construction of a fortress to deter future pirate activity.
Wow, talk about a proactive approach.
Yeah.
So did they ever build the fortress?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Despite Gonzaga's pleas and even detailed fortress designs by a renowned military engineer, a certain Tiburcio Spinocchi, the king never actually gave the order to build.
Really? After all that? I guess even kings had their budgets. Still, it makes you wonder what Benidorm Island, and maybe even Benidorm itself, would look like today if that fortress had been built.
It's fascinating to think about, isn't it? Those sliding doors moments in history.
Exactly. But even without a fortress, I imagine pirates weren't the only ones vying for a piece of this maritime gem, were they?
You're right. The island's bountiful fishing grounds continued to be a source of, shall we say, lively debate well into more recent centuries. This time, it was between the neighboring towns of Benidorm and Villajoyosa.
Ah, classic case of, that's my fish?
Yeah.
What was the source of the contention?
It seems both towns claimed exclusive rights to the waters around Benidorm Island. The blog describes a centuries-old fishing rivalry, complete with legal battles and everything.
Wow, so we've got pirates, fishing disputes, centuries of history playing out against this incredible backdrop.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that modern times could compete with all that drama. What happened to the island once the 20th century rolled around?
You might be surprised to hear that in the grand scheme of things, the 20th century was a pretty wild ride for Benidorm Island. It went from being almost forgotten to nearly being auctioned off by the Spanish government.
Wait, seriously, someone could have bought Benidorm Island? Like the whole thing? That seems wild.
It does, doesn't it? It makes you wonder who was in the market for a private island back then and what their plans might have been.
I know, right? Did the blog say why the auction was scrapped? Seems like a missed opportunity for someone.
It's not entirely clear why they changed their minds, but while the island narrowly avoided private ownership, its future still remained a bit up in the air for a while. In fact, there was even a point when a former Benidorm mayor had this, well, ambitious plan for the island.
Ambitious, as in
Let's just say he was a big fan of development.
develop, as in build on it. Condos and resorts.
You get the idea. Thankfully, though, those plans never came to fruition either.
Okay, good. After all we've learned about its history, the last thing Benidorm Island needs is a high-rise makeover.
Agreed. Luckily, in 2005, Benidorm Island finally got the recognition and protection it deserved when it was officially incorporated into the Serra Gelada Natural Park.
Okay, that's good to hear. It sounds like it's in good hands now.
It is. And being part of a natural park means there's a whole other side to this island that we haven't even touched on yet.
Right. We've talked about the pirates, the Romans, the near auction. But what about the island's ecosystem? What's it like today in terms of the natural world?
It's more than just a pretty face, that's for sure.
All right, so let's shift gears from history to nature for a bit. What kind of flora and fauna are we talking about here? What did the blog highlight? So we're talking about an island that's endured, well, a lot. Scorching sun, salty winds.
And let's not forget, not exactly an abundance of soil.
Right. So what kind of life can actually thrive in those conditions? You'd think it'd be pretty barren.
You'd be surprised. The blog describes this surprisingly diverse range of plants that call Benidorm Island home, all uniquely adapted to those harsh conditions.
Adapted in what way?
Well, take the sea fennel, for example. They cling to those cliffs we talked about earlier, those almost vertical ones.
Yeah, I can barely picture them without getting a fear of heights.
Well, imagine these plants, just hanging on for dear life. They've developed these incredible fleshy leaves that help them retain moisture, essential in that arid environment.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? All those elaborate irrigation systems we create.
Right. Nature finds a way. And it's not just the sea fennel. The blog also mentions the maritime aster, adding a splash of color to the island. Beautiful purple flowers, very resilient.
Okay, so we've got some greenery, some pops of color. What about those iconic prickly pear cacti? I imagine those are right at home on Benidorm Island.
Oh, absolutely. They're practically synonymous with the Mediterranean landscape, aren't they? The blog mentions them alongside Mediterranean buckthorn all over the slopes.
It's amazing how plants can thrive in the most unexpected places. But what about the animal life? I mean, surely those sun-baked rocks attract more than just a few adventurous hikers.
You're definitely on the right track. And while you might spot the occasional lizard soaking up the sun, the real stars of Benidorm Island's animal kingdom are the seabirds.
Seabirds. So we're talking gulls, terns, that sort of thing.
You'll definitely see your fair share of yellow-legged gulls. They're everywhere. But keep an eye out for the Audouin's gull, too. Now, those are a bit rarer.
Are they those elegant ones with the coral-colored beaks? I think I saw some photos in the blog.
Those are the ones. And they're actually a threatened species, so conservationists are keeping a close eye on them.
Threatened, you say. What's threatening them, if you don't mind my asking?
A lot of it has to do with habitat loss and pollution, unfortunately. But there's hope. They're hoping the Audouin's gulls might start breeding on Benidorm Island.
That would be fantastic. Fingers crossed for those gulls. Speaking of birds, the blog mentioned something called a European storm petrel. Any chance we'd see those if we visited?
Maybe, but you'd have to be pretty lucky and have a nose for adventure.
How come?
Well, they nest in crevices on the island, which is normal enough for seabirds, but they're nocturnal, only come out at night.
Ah, so they're like the island's little vampire birds. I like it.
Something like that. And, well, let's just say the blog mentions they have a rather distinctive odor. Not exactly pleasant.
Huh. Okay, maybe admire those from afar. So we've got the resilient plants, the haven for seabirds. That's quite a lot of life packed onto one little island. But the blog also mentions something about a whole other ecosystem just beneath the surface of the water. La Llosa, I think they called it.
That's right. La Llosa is this incredible rocky reef system located just south of the island, absolutely teeming with marine life.
So we're talking like an underwater jungle.
Exactly. Think colorful fish darting in and out of the coral, crustaceans scuttling along the seabed, maybe even the occasional octopus lurking in the shadows.
Wow, an underwater world hidden just below the waves. Amazing. You know, it just goes to show you how much history, how much natural wonder can be packed into even the most unassuming corners of our planet.
It really does. Benidorm Island is a testament to that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it makes you realize how much there still is to explore, how many stories are waiting to be uncovered. Who knew that a seemingly insignificant island off the coast of Spain could hold such a wealth of secrets? From ancient legends and Roman settlements to pirate hideouts and a thriving ecosystem, Benidorm Island reminds us that sometimes the greatest adventures are found in the most unexpected places. So the next time you find yourself on the Costa Blanca, be sure to look out for that unassuming silhouette on the horizon. You never know what wonders might be waiting for you just beyond the waves.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've done a pretty good job of uncovering some of those wonders today.
I agree. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. Until next time, keep exploring.